Welcome to our LEEF Brands Summer 2025 Bitcoin Update. I'm your host, Jesse Redmond, Head of Investor Relations and Business Development at LEEF Brands. I'm joined today by our CEO, Micah Anderson. Micah, what's happening, man? How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Jesse.
You're welcome. Excited to talk about Bitcoin. There's a lot of energy in the space. Bitcoin is, approaching new highs, and I'm excited to catch people up on what we're doing with the strategy.
Sure. I'm happy to opine.
Wonderful. Well, let's take it, Micah, and start with the big picture. Why does cannabis need Bitcoin?
Why does cannabis need Bitcoin? It's a good question. You know, anyone that's been paying attention to cannabis, whether it's through the lens of being an investor or as an operator, it's no secret that the cannabis markets over the past 4 or 5 years have been extremely challenged. We've got significant headwinds all over the place, right? And as a public company and even a private company, all of our balance sheets are eroding. The asset values of all of these licenses and businesses that were acquired or built over time have slid backwards significantly. The banking industry has marginalized our businesses for years, and still does to this day. I'm the CEO of a publicly traded legal cannabis business, and I still get kicked out of banks. The investor base in cannabis is fatigued for valid reasons. I think, and as a result of that, there's no capital. There's no one's coming to save the day in the industry. It's really gotten to the point where you really have to tailor your business to be able to survive in these challenging environments, because raising money has become, extremely challenging to do. And the capital markets, for the most part, are essentially closed within our industry. Those are all the negatives of what's going on. And I think that Bitcoin provides a solution to all of those. And so I think that, that's why I think Bitcoin and cannabis are two industries that are great to pair. I think that they're both rooted in the same kind of ethos around freedom and sovereignty. Cannabis definitely, I think, provides that. People that are looking to medicate or even use a vice in an alternative way to alcohol or Western medicines. And I think that Bitcoin does the same thing. I think that Bitcoin is freedom money. And by pairing the two together, I think that there's a way to offset and actually find that catalyst event that everyone in the cannabis industry always talks about.
And Micah, you're an interesting, I would call you a Bitcoiner now, but I think your path to getting to be a Bitcoiner, being really excited about Bitcoin, is an interesting case study, and not too different from myself in that, I was showed, Bitcoin, gosh, I suppose not super early, but 2013, 14, I had friends talking about it. 16, 17, 18, more people got into it. Obviously got really popular, around the pandemic with the stimulus checks. And looking back, I was arrogant and dismissive at the time, and just didn't put the work in to really understand what made Bitcoin unique. Fast forward to 18 months or so ago, we started talking about it. I knew LEEF was interested in it. So I humbled myself and went through an education process. And it's one of those things, the more I learned, the more I said, oh man, I had this wrong, and really had to humble myself, check my ego a bit, keep educating myself. And the more I learned, the more excited I got. And I think that's common in the Bitcoin community. The more education you get, the more you start to buy in, understanding the problem with the fiat currencies and how Bitcoin can be the solution there. Do you want to talk a little bit about, your Bitcoin journey and how you decided ultimately it was the right strategic fit, not just for you, Micah, but also for LEEF?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you're right. Bitcoin is kind of what the Bitcoin community calls it, like it's the ultimate ego check, or it's test your ego. And yeah, same thing. I went through the same thing. I dismissed it multiple times over the years. People brought it to me as something that they felt like I should be interested in, and knee-jerk reaction, completely uneducated on the subject, just was like, no, not interested. This is, internet nerd money. It's a Ponzi scheme. It's a this, it's a that, just like everybody else. I was, that said, growing up, my dad was wisely educated my brother and I on the sound money. What is sound money? What is the Federal Reserve? What is centralized banking? he was a big proponent of gold. He was a gold bug, and I became a gold bug too. So early days cannabis industry for me, this is before Prop 64 in California, when the industry was exclusively ran on cash. There was zero banking available to our industry. That was the place of savings where we put a lot of our money was into gold, and as a result of it, like, thank God we did. So I had this understanding of like sound money and what the Fed was doing. And it wasn't until recently that someone else came to me. It was after, honestly, Michael Saylor had been a success story with his public company and what he did with Bitcoin, that I eventually took the time to start to educate myself a little bit. And I got about halfway through a book called The Bitcoin Standard, written by a guy named Saifedean Ammous. And yeah, it didn't take me long. I got halfway through it and I was just like, oh shit, I was wrong. I had this thing wrong. And since then, I probably read 30 books on the subject, everything from Principles of Economics, which is another book that he has, that it's like less about Bitcoin and more about just like what is money, the history of money, the history of monetary policy. I'm like kind of a geek on the subject. I like reading about it, as dry as it is. Thousands of hours of podcasts and just listening to, anyone that I can, really, to get more and more educated. And over the course of time, I become more and more convicted on the strategy. So that's how I personally came to being a believer in Bitcoin. I'm running a public company, which I'm the largest shareholder. So I'm incentivized to figure out a way to make this company a success story, not only for myself, but also for our shareholders as well, the people that have put money into this business. And I personally have just come to the conclusion, that like, if you're a fiduciary in a public company in the cannabis industry right now, and you are not taking a look, and you're having the same knee-jerk reaction that I had, you are making a mistake. And I would just encourage people to put in, 100 hours, read 5 books, and see if you walk away with the same thought process on like that. This isn't worth our time. And yeah, that's how I came to the conclusion that I feel like this is the right strategy for LEEF, and LEEF needs to figure out how we can adopt this strategy.
And so, Micah, how is LEEF using Bitcoin today, and how do you see that evolving in the future?
Yeah, at a lower level, we started off with just setting the company up to be able to make payments with Bitcoin. So we set up what's called a multi-sig wallet for the company, 3 sets of keys, so we could hold our Bitcoin in self-custody and not leave it on an exchange. We put out a press release just letting people know, other companies in the industry, and then even email distribution lists to other companies, that we will now accept Bitcoin as a form of payment. We actually incentivize vendors to pay us, or clients to pay us in Bitcoin, give you a discount if you do. We set up our retail location to be able to, same thing, accept Bitcoin in the form of payments. And since we've done that, we've accumulated roughly 5 coins that we hold on our multi-sig account through a company called Unchained. That's kind of the lower level way that we're utilizing Bitcoin now. The long-term, bigger picture idea is really figuring out a way to either leverage the capital markets, leverage real estate assets that we have, or sweep cash flows that we believe that we will have in the future from the with changes that we've made to the business into Bitcoin. And so what does that mean? It means, if you're able to go out and purchase through a bond or equity, $5-10 million worth of Bitcoin, and put that on the balance sheet, and then go out and replicate the process. And really the goal is to put as much Bitcoin onto the balance sheet for as long as we possibly can, with the belief that Bitcoin is going to appreciate at the same rate that it's been appreciating for the past 10 years, roughly 50 to 60% CAGR over time. Eventually that slows down a bit, and it's a balance sheet strategy. How do you strengthen and fortify your balance sheet at a time when you've got nothing but write-downs and headwinds and uncertainty in the industry? So that's the long-term picture. Then you got the short-term thing of just how we're kind of utilizing it on a day-to-day basis, trying to educate just a lot of our bigger clients and vendors just on, them using it as well. It's an easy way for us to transact. If I want to send you, $1 million on a Sunday, I can do that. No, and a bank can't stop me from doing that. Whereas right now, even if you have a cannabis bank, it's expensive. You got to go through, a long process of filling out documentation just to send money back and forth to each other. And you basically circumvent that entire system. So yeah, that's kind of short term, long term.
Yeah, definitely faster and cheaper payment solution. I'm surprised more of the cannabis industry doesn't use it just because it's a better mechanism in that way. But on that second piece you're talking about there, Micah, would you call that a Bitcoin Treasury reserve strategy like you're seeing from the company strategy, Michael Saylor's firm? And I think there's about 100 other public companies that are using these Bitcoin Treasury reserve strategies.
Yeah, yep, and that number is growing daily, it seems like. But yeah, Saylor was the guy that this guy has a massive set of cojones on him, and he wrote the blue book, the blueprint for this, and has open sourced it and kind of educated people. Literally hosts an event in Miami, the corporate Bitcoin event, where he encourages other corporations like LEEF to come, and he will teach you exactly what he's doing and how he's doing it. And anyone that isn't familiar with the strategy or what his company's done, which is now called Strategy, you should look it up. You should listen to a lot of the stuff that he's been talking about since the inception. I think he started doing this in 2020, and he has been wildly successful in doing so. And it's crazy because it keeps becoming more and more successful. And so we started paying attention to it, and I've been tracking all these other companies that are launching and seeing what are they doing, how are they doing it a little different, and so LEEF is taking a page out of his book, applying it to our own business, and our goal is to be the first publicly traded cannabis company to run this strategy and run very hard on it, while at the same time still running our business. LEEF, like a lot of other companies, has had challenges and struggles, and I think that we have this farm online that came on this year. We took a big risk in putting money, time, and energy into building out this farm at a time when a lot of people told us that we were crazy for doing so in California. And I'm happy to report that I feel like we're now seeing the financial impact of that, and I think it was the right move. I think it pushes LEEF into a profitable position here in the near future. And so I say it this way sometimes. We're all running our businesses off of a strategy that everybody uses, your P&L strategy, right? This is my profit and my loss. This is how I'm going to grow my business. I'm going to figure out how to increase my revenue and decrease my costs and increase my margins. And as a result of that, I'm going to be rewarded by the capital markets and the investors. That's one way to do it. You've got one engine on your boat when you're looking at it that way. And this new strategy that was, not invented until about 15, 16 years ago, now puts an even bigger motor on the back of your boat, and gives you two motors. And that's running a balance sheet strategy using Bitcoin, so that you've got two shots on goal, belt and suspenders approach to growing your business. And that's what we're trying to do here at LEEF.
And one of the things I like about the Bitcoin community, Micah, is there's a lot of innovation there. And there's a lot of cool financial products coming out. I was listening to Jack Mahler recently talking about his firm, the things that they're doing there in terms of creating different products with Bitcoin. Once you have Bitcoin, especially things where you can borrow against it. Is that one of the things that you like too? Is if you can accumulate a bunch of Bitcoin, it gives you a bunch of different options in terms of what you can do with that, especially if you want to borrow against a portion of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you need to be intelligent about the way that you go and do that. You don't want to go over leverage yourself, but yeah, just round math, right? If you get $10 million worth of Bitcoin on the balance sheet and it continues to go up at a 50% CAGR year over year, I'll leave it to the audience to do the math on that, but you end up with a huge number at the end of that decade. And it's the most liquid asset on the planet that sits on your balance sheet. And 10 years from now, who knows what these financial packages look like and the optionality. But as it stands today, if I had that on the balance sheet of LEEF, yeah, I could go leverage that. I could take a loan if I want to, if I need $1 million to move into New York, I don't have to go to a bank in an environment where it's almost impossible to get investors to come into cannabis. You no longer need that. You have in essence created this like sovereign internal bank that sits on your own balance sheet as a way to fortify your own business. And that's one of the things I think is fascinating. I'm super excited about it. I really want to do that for LEEF. I think that would create tremendous value. But yeah, 100%. There's all kinds of packages that are out there. People do this personally. You can go lend against it at 9%. Bitcoin's going up at 50. 50 minus 9, 41. You're still in the positive. But Bitcoin is volatile. You need to research it. You need to be wise in the way that you go about doing that, and you don't want to get over leveraged and margin called.
Yep.
And people need to do their research, take the time to really understand, the history of how Bitcoin has ebbed and flowed, because it has had significant drawdowns, and you need to just anticipate that's a possibility. It could happen again.
Yeah, I think that's one thing all investors need to be aware of is the expected drawdown to harvest the expected return. And Bitcoin, historically has gone through these 50, 70% plus drawdowns. And so I think it's important for investors to realize A, that for themselves, but realize also B, as a company, we're optimistic about the long-term direction of Bitcoin, but we do expect meaningful drawdowns along the way. That's kind of part of how Bitcoin works.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So, Micah, you talked a little bit about the challenges we've had in the cannabis industry. We're over 4 years into what I would call the Great Cannabis Drawdown. If you look at the MSOS ETF, which is the industry leading ETF, it's down about 80%, 85% now. It peaked on February 10th, 2021. So you can see, we're 4.5 years into this drawdown. Really one of, if not the largest secular drawdowns I've seen. Been super painful, but often on the other side of it, you have a lot of opportunity. And when we talk about what's going to change things in the cannabis industry, the number one thing people are focused on, Mike, federal reform. And we've been light on reform. We haven't had safe banking, despite it getting introduced so many times. We're still waiting on Schedule 3. Eventually, we'll see federal legalization in interstate commerce, which would be huge for LEEF, given our us having one of the largest farms in the world here in California. All these catalysts stand to benefit us. And thankfully, it looks like talk about reform is heating up again. We'll see if that turns, but we're cautiously optimistic that Trump may be, behind the scenes taking some actions to try to move things forward on things like Schedule 3, important for the industry. We move the 280E tax burden, even potential of things like safe banking getting introduced this year. But we've been down this road before, Micah, and we know we can't count on these changes. So I'm curious what your views are on reform at this point. And if we were to get reform, do you think that means that there's less need for Bitcoin, or do you see reform as maybe kind of a third boat on our engine, where we have the fundamental catalyst, we have the Bitcoin catalyst, and bolting on reform would just be one more benefit?
Yeah, it's the latter. I think that I still think that we should 100% adopt the Bitcoin strategy. If federal reform was to happen tomorrow, I'd still say 100% we should do this. My thoughts on that are like you said, it's like we've been rug pulled on this issue multiple times over the years, and so it's like I'm hesitant to like put too many eggs in the basket of like, oh, this is going to happen. Like, let's really bet on politicians finally getting this right. I think that yeah, who knows what happens there, right? So my thoughts there are like, let's build LEEF as if it's not going to happen, in the sense that like, let's get it on sound footing and get the company profitable. That's kind of initiative number one for us. I think that, like I said earlier, I think the farm was a huge step in us being able to finally do that as a company. Let's get ourselves to the scale and size to where we're one of the biggest and best at what we do, so that in the event it does happen, we're in a good position to be able to capitalize on what the impact of that will be. Meaning we're able to ship our products out of state at a price where the rest of the country won't be able to compete at a scale that other people are going to have a hard time catching up to. So it's like, on one hand, I say, I guess we're not counting on it, but we are kind of positioning the company to be big enough to where I don't want to be overlooked when that happens. I want to make sure that we're in the right position for if it was to happen. And if it does, I think you said 3 boats. It's I would say 3 engines.
engines. That's a better way to say it.
Yeah, 3 engines. Yeah, that's how, so it's like, okay, we got our P&L strategy. This is how we're going to grow our business. We're going to have our cultivation. We're going to have our extraction business, and we're going to go plant flags in other states. That's our P&L strategy. That's how we're going to grow the cannabis business. Then we've got our Bitcoin treasury strategy. How are we going to go about doing that? Well, we're going to leverage the capital markets, real estate that we might own, launch products that are designed to educate our industry around Bitcoin. That's something else that we're looking into doing as another way to stack more Bitcoin. And then the third being that if federal reform was to happen, man, then I just look at it like all the stars are lining up, and it puts LEEF in an even stronger position. I really think that, like, I believe that, like, 10 years from now, most public companies are going to have some sort of Bitcoin treasury strategy. And I think that you are going to be at a serious disadvantage trying to compete with other companies that don't. I want LEEF to be the first. I'm just trying to, like, and I don't care what people say, like, I mean, I care in the sense, but, like, I don't, like, I think that we're right. And I'm willing to be the first to go and just show that, like, this can work. And I think that the rest of the cannabis industry should follow suit. And I think that it will put LEEF in a position later down the road when M&A, and things of that nature do make more sense, because right now it's really, really difficult to do that. But if you're sitting across the table and you're talking about M&A, and I'm like, dude, I got $30 million of the most liquid asset on the planet, and we're comparing equities, like, I'm in a much stronger position than you are. People are going to want to swim and attach what they have onto LEEF's boat if we can get ourselves into that position. And so I think it actually puts us in a better position once federal reform happens, even for, like, being a target. When these big companies start to look at, like, who should we purchase? Look at this company. Is it, they're the biggest and the best at what they do, and the largest cannabis state in the nation being California, and they have $30 million of Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Like, this is the target. So that's how I see it unfolding.
Yeah, and you forgot to add in the New York story there as well.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so people that don't know, we also just acquired a Tier 1 processing license in New York in June, and we're currently setting up operations there. We think that'll be a $2 billion market. Concentrates used in 55% of products in New York, and we should be cranking out a full line of concentrates later this quarter. So on the fundamental side, definitely have a story in California with the farm, and also getting set up in New York this quarter. So really excited about those parts of the business. Micah, when I post about Bitcoin, one common thing I see is people lumping Bitcoin into all crypto and just being dismissive about crypto as a bucket. Can you tell us a little bit about how you see Bitcoin as being unique from all crypto? Because I know you're not, quote, a crypto guy, you're specifically a Bitcoin guy.
Yeah, I'm a toxic Bitcoiner. Bitcoin, what is different about it? Bitcoin, it's not owned by anybody. It's decentralized. It was the first one. I view most of the other coins as being like copycats of what Bitcoin is. And a lot of them, it's like anything, it's like someone sees something where there's value being created and a good idea, and they try and replicate it. And sometimes they do it in an unethical way where they create these pump and dump scenarios. And a lot of these, thousands of other coins that are competing with Bitcoin are just that. And so, for, I guess, the listeners that don't understand, so Bitcoin, it's decentralized peer-to-peer protocol, and it's where most of the value in quote unquote crypto resides. And I think it's because all of the smart money is in Bitcoin. I know that people have made money. It's kind of like, I view it as kind of like gambling with the altcoins. They go up. If you're on the inside circle, and you're able to sell at the right time, guys make money. I know that that's the case, but, like, for us, thinking like long term and like creating real value within the company and for my own my personal life as well, I just focus on Bitcoin. There is no CEO, there is no board. It's truly decentralized, and it's spread around the world to where no one owns it. Similar to like a constitution. It has a set of rules that hard cap the amount of coins that will be issued over the course of time to 21 million. we're at like 19.8 of those, I think, at the moment. So over the next 120 years ish, the rest of those coins will be distributed. And so it's like the first time in history where there's been a deflationary money where, there's at a certain point it's capped. And once that happens, the value of those coins rises, which is the opposite of what happens with centralized banking, where you have the value of something, take a dollar, and then as you print more and you put more and more of that unit into the market, it devalues the $1 that you once had. And that's the difference between fiat currency and Bitcoin, or one of the differences. So I don't know. Hopefully I'm answering your question.
No, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the supply constrained nature is really unique about it compared to fiat and other crypto out there. So I think that's a great point to make there. As we wrap things up, Mike, you're great about sending educational materials about Bitcoin. You've turned me on to a number of good books and regularly send over good podcasts as well. For listeners that want to learn more, are there places you would turn them to in terms of introductory reading or podcasts that you listen to on a regular basis?
Yeah, definitely. There's a list of books, which I'll rattle off here. One thing that I always tell people is that, like, I feel like, at least this is just for me personally, I feel like I without having an understanding of what centralized banking is, fiat currency, what the Federal Reserve is, the impact of the Fed, like the history of money, like that type of stuff. I think if you have a baseline understanding of all of that first before you then go explore Bitcoin, you're going to have an easier time understanding it and why it's important, and seeing what it solves. So if you're not like me and you can't get through very dry books on the Fed, I would say two books to maybe start with that kind of touch on both topics are a guy named Larry Lepard has a book called The Big Print. It's a newer book where, like, I'd say the first 60-70% of the book is on kind of more of like, what is money, the history of money, the history of the Fed, its impact on centralized banks around the world. And then it gets into Bitcoin. I think it's a great book. Saifedean Ammous has a book called The Bitcoin Standard. It's very famous, and it's great because it was written, Safe's book was written years ago, 10 years ago now at this point. So it's like you can really see like his predictions and just like, wow, this guy kind of nailed it. Whereas Larry's book is newer. Larry focuses more on like what he believes is going to happen here in the near future, which is the big print, which ironically enough, you've got the big beautiful bill that was just passed, and what people, politically, however you look at that, what you should understand about it is that it is going to inject somewhere between $4 and $9 trillion of new money into the economy, and there is a short-term and a long-term impact of that, which will affect your life, your business's life, and the price of Bitcoin, the price of gold. So those two books are great. If you want to get into the Fed stuff, Ron Paul has a book called End the Fed. Again, it's old. I read it when it first came out a long time ago, and I love old books because then you can kind of like gauge, like, were they correct or were they not correct? So that's a great one. Safe has a whole slew of books, so all of his books are great. Lynn Alden has a book called Broken Money. One of my favorite books is a book by Jeff Booth called The Price of Tomorrow. Same thing. It's like the first half of the book is really more about AI and what's going to happen with this, what he is predicting to be a deflationary period of time that's coming because of AI, where the prices of everything are going to fall, but then there's going to be a negative impact of that as well. And then he ties in why and where is Bitcoin important in that equation. It's fascinating. It's it totally like will blow your brain up, especially if you're a traditional finance guy. Like, you're going to have a hard time, like, kind of de-educating yourself or re-educating yourself on how the economy works. So all of those books are great. There's a ton of podcasts. And then Michael Saylor, if you're a public market person, if you're investing into public equities, whether it's cannabis or otherwise, or you are a CEO or a CFO or in some sort of fiduciary position in your company, go to michaelsaylor.com or hope.com, and I would advise listen to every word that guy says. I mean, he is that dude is he is a powerhouse. His brain he's a very, very smart individual, and the way he thinks about it, and he's the exact opposite of the way I am fumbling through it. He's very, very smart, and I would advise people to go start at the beginning, like his thought process, because he did the same thing I did with Bitcoin. He dunked on it, dismissed it, realized that he had made a mistake in doing so, adopted the strategy, and then look at his company. It's one of the biggest success stories in the history of public equity. So, yeah, there's a whole slew of information there for you.
Great. Any particular podcasts that are must listen?
Preston Pish.
Yeah.
I love his stuff. It was cool. I got to hang out with him. I met him at a Bitcoin conference and hung out with him for a bit. He's great. I like the podcasts that are less focused on like the price of Bitcoin. There's a bunch of those out there. Like, just to me, that's like after a while, that's kind of almost irrelevant. I think Preston's is good. There's another guy, Breedlove. It's a podcast called What is Money? And I like the way his brain thinks of it. There's actually a guy that co-hosts it, and he's a cannabis guy. I'm forgetting his name, but he will like step in and do shows for Robert when Robert's like out hanging with his family or whatnot. And he was a weed guy from Humboldt, just north of where I'm sitting today, and that got into Bitcoin. And you can listen to his whole story on how similar to what I'm talking about as it relates to cannabis and Bitcoin. And he's very intelligent. He speaks well. He's intelligent. He's articulate. So I like listening to him. But yeah, and then from there, the algorithm's going to send you 10 others that you can check out.
Yeah, there's no shortage of Bitcoin content out there.
Yeah, totally.
Well, great. The last thing I'll say is Mitchell Osak, who's one of the top consultants in cannabis based in Toronto, writes a great Substack that talks about cannabis. And he was talking about cannabis and Bitcoin that just came out this week. It was nice to include a bit about LEEF brands on there. So thank you for doing that, Mitchell. You can find that at mitchellosak.substack.com. That's Mitchell, like you would spell Mitchell, then Osak, O-S-A-K, substack.com. So I encourage you guys to check that out. But Mike, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts today. This was great. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for taking the time.
And thank you everybody for listening. We look forward to keeping you updated on the strategy as we move forward.